Good evening. My name is Ashley McBride. I'm the State Director for Our Future Pennsylvania, an organization that is committed to creating a more progressive Pennsylvania by raising the voices of voters across the Commonwealth. We're excited this evening to be joined. The co-host for this event and this discussion is the SEIU State Council and SEIU Healthcare, as well as 8 state and local leaders from across Pennsylvania. We were having a conversation this evening specifically around raising the minimum wage. The urgency of passing a $15 minimum wage, which will lift wages of 32 million nationwide and 1.4 million workers right here in the Commonwealth. It is important more now than ever. Just to give a quick lay of the land, we are expecting a minimum wage hike in President Biden's stimulus package, but it got blocked due to parliamentary decision. This roundtable discussion will touch on the impact of Pennsylvania's currently holding hourly minimum wage, which has not increased since 2009, and what can be done moving forward. So I'd like to introduce our roundtable guests, State Senator Tim Kearney, State Senator Maria Collette, State Representative Donna Bullock, State Representative Brian Sims, State Representative Stephen Malagary, State Representative Mike Zabel, Philadelphia City Council Member Sherelle Parker, Lancaster City Council Member Janet Diaz. Also joining me, as I mentioned today from SEIU Healthcare, is Jesse Wildman. He's the Secretary Treasurer and Director of Innovation. Jesse was a union organizer for over 20 years and has helped thousands of hospitals and nursing home workers from unions win strong contracts. He is also a strategist of the home healthcare workers movement and leads efforts to use 21st century technology that supports member leaders. Just want to go briefly before I turn it over to Jesse for some opening remarks over the ground rules. We've got a packed house tonight, so we're going to set some simple yet very informative ground rules. I'll moderate the panel and ask questions in a round robin format. Please mute yourself if you aren't speaking. If you are in the audience and have a question, please place it in the comments and we will do our best to get it answered or follow up following tonight's event. We'll make sure to share the contact information of our electeds by request if you drop that in the chat. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Jesse to kick us off this evening.
Great, thanks. And I just want to, first of all, appreciate being part of this event, the opportunity to address folks. My name is Jesse Wilderman, and I'm the Secretary Treasurer for SEIU Healthcare Pennsylvania. And I do want to thank all of our elected leaders from around the Commonwealth who are standing with us in the fight for 15 and have been standing with us in this really critically important fight. Our union represents about 45,000 healthcare workers across the Commonwealth who work in hospitals, nursing homes, and home care. And today, many of those workers in many places all across the Commonwealth joined other essential workers in a protest really demanding that we have a $15 an hour minimum wage. And frankly, it's a protest we don't think we should have to continue to be in. We should already have a $15 an hour minimum wage. And I just want to give you 1 minute about what we as healthcare workers have been through over the last year in the midst of this pandemic. And probably everybody on this phone has heard that we've been called heroes over and over again. You've seen the signs, the billboards, the posters in front of a number of different places where essential workers and healthcare workers work. And I'll give you an example. Miss Lolita is a home care worker, who's a member of our union. For the last year, every single day, she got on the bus and she went to someone's house, to a number of people's houses, to provide support to them. She provides support to people in their home, people who need help with bathing, feeding, dressing, toileting. And every day she got on the bus in the middle of a pandemic, sometimes with PPE, sometimes without. And she went out and she did her job because she cares that much about her clients. She cares that much about the people that she takes care of. And every day people told her she was a hero. And for that, she makes $12 an hour as a home caregiver. Or Keisha is a nursing home worker in northeastern Pennsylvania. Keisha watched 70 of her residents pass away this year from COVID. And she went in every single day to provide support to them, to provide support to her coworkers. She watched dozens and dozens of her coworkers get sick themselves. She was scared for herself and her family, but every single day she went in as a nurse's aide to try to provide care and attention and love to people in an incredibly difficult time. And she doesn't make $15 an hour. And so you can imagine as healthcare workers, it gets a little tiring to hear that we're heroes over and over and over again. And yet no one seems willing to step up and make sure that heroes get paid a living wage that allows them to take care of their own family, to get school clothes for their kids, to be able to pay their rent, to make sure they have enough food on their table. And we're sort of at a point, frankly, where we really want to say to everybody who will listen, if we really are the heroes that you say we are, you've got to pay us a wage that allows us to take care of our families and take care of the people that we support. And I think this country voted for change in November. I think we made it clear that it's time for change, and we're really expecting elected officials to get it done. And whatever we need to do to get it done, no parliamentarian should be able to turn us around. We need to get a path to 15, and we need to get it done now. I'll say one last thing and close, which is that we have a group of home care workers actually who just announced today that they're going to tomorrow afternoon launch a fast for 15. 4 home care workers from around the Commonwealth are going to come together in Pittsburgh starting at 3 p.m. tomorrow in the Bloomfield neighborhood of Pittsburgh. And they're going to launch a 48-hour fast for 15 to draw attention to the fact that as home care workers, they face risk and poverty every single day. And it's time that we brought that out into the open and that we get a path to 15. So I would encourage folks who are on this call, if you can, to drop by in person. And we'll get you, it's at 4121 Main Street in Bloomfield in Pittsburgh, and show support for them, obviously masked up in a socially distant way. Or if you can't be there in person, to join a Zoom or to join them, to send them messages of solidarity as they put their bodies and their lives on the line. And take the risk that's necessary to demand that we get a path to 15. So I want to thank again the opportunity to join tonight, and really want to thank our elected officials for being here with us today. And I'll turn it back over.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jesse. It has been a pleasure to spend this day of action with SEIU. And certainly, again, want to stand in solidarity with each of your members who is out there on the front line. So thank you so much. I hope that you are able to stay with us for the rest of this event. But again, thank you. As you all can see, we have an entirely packed house tonight. We have so many heavy hitters. We are very fortunate that so many lovely faces have joined us, those who serve us at various levels of government across the Commonwealth. We're going to jump right into questions. As we mentioned, we certainly want the audience to have an opportunity. If there are questions that you would like to share, comments or concerns, to please drop them in the chat, and we will make sure that we do our best to get to them. If we're not able to get to them on this evening, we will make sure that we follow up following this night's presentation. So my first question, I think I'm gonna go with Senators Kearney and Collette. But what was your reaction when you heard a minimum wage hike wouldn't be included in the American Rescue Plan? And so we can go with Senator Kearney first, and then Collette. And certainly if there's anyone who has strong feelings, we have lots of questions. We want to make sure that everyone is heard this evening, but please feel free to let me know for our elected leaders who are joining tonight, and we'll make sure that we address those and give you an opportunity. So I'm turning it over to you, to Senator Kearney.
Thank you, Ashley. When I first heard that the 15 was, the wage hike was being dropped, my heart sank. I thought that was the only way we were going to get a livable wage in Pennsylvania, because the legislature seems to have no interest at all in even discussing it. It seems like. I mean, the fact that our minimum wage is actually technically lower than the national wage, and that's the reason why we have 7.25 in Pennsylvania. But we're still fighting against the same sort of knee-jerk reactions that people think that the people who earn minimum wage are teenagers flipping hamburgers, and we just know that that's not true, and we know that it's nonsensical. So we have a big problem in our society where we undervalue the people that we really need for society to function. And the pandemic has just magnified that, exacerbated it. Yet still, we can't seem to even get a conversation going around raising the minimum wage. So, Maria, you want to jump in here?
See, Senator Kearney has already joined me as my co-host. Senator Maria Collette, are you able to? Okay,
I
wonderful.
can unmute. Okay, I'm sorry. I
Wonderful.
wasn't able to unmute before, but I have a lot to say. So I'm glad that Tim turned it over to me here just for a second. And, you know, I have to say that one of the other things that was really devastating about the announcement, you know, once again, and I don't know, I know you all are so busy living your lives, doing the incredibly good, hard work that you're doing every day. So I don't know how much you pay attention to the rules of procedure as they occur in our state Senate or in our federal government. But I can tell you this, that once again, this is, you know, games being played with the lives of Americans, the lives of Pennsylvanians. We are again beholden to a parliamentarian rule. The parliamentarian is not an elected person. She doesn't answer to the will of the people in our nation. And once again, we're being held to this, you know, really ridiculous rule that was enacted or just stated and decided without using our sense and really standing up and saying, no, this is not what the people have asked of us, and it is not what the people in our nation want. It's the same here in our Commonwealth. We know overwhelmingly that the workers in our Commonwealth not only deserve to have a raise in the minimum wage, but they absolutely support a raise in the minimum wage. I mean, Pennsylvanians, you know, from east to west, north to south, want to see people that are caring for and dealing with our most vulnerable family members and community members earn a good living wage. We know that that's the right thing to do. We want to support it. Our governor has stood up time and again and said that he wants to make it a budget priority, but we have forces at work in our House and in our Senate that are refusing to get these measures across the finish line and to the governor's desk for a signature. And I can tell you right now that this is nothing more than partisan politics. It has nothing to do with making sure that we are actually working for the will of the people and that we are standing up for what we know is the right and moral thing to do. It is really about buckling under pressure, and it is about, as Tim said, as Senator Carney said, it's really about the same old refrain, this notion that minimum wage workers are no one other than high school workers earning, you know, some cash at a summer job. We know for a fact that is not true. We know overwhelmingly that many minimum wage workers here in our Commonwealth and across our nation are people that are working with our most vulnerable populations. They are the people that are child caregivers for our children. They are caregivers for our elderly. They are caregivers for our intellectually disabled and autistic community members. They are the people, as Jesse said, who are heroes in their everyday lives. And it is time for us to stand with all of you, with all of them, and with those of us in the legislature who are ready to make this happen and get it across the finish line. I'm sad to see that in our federal government, we haven't made this a priority, but that doesn't mean that we're going to stop making it a priority here in Pennsylvania and fighting every single day to get this to the governor's desk with a signature so that we can finally raise the wage for Pennsylvania's hard workers. Thanks, Ash.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Senator Collette and Senator Kearney. My next question, I really want to give an opportunity for each of our electeds who've joined us tonight to talk about, as you know, you all represent at your own respective levels of government. You represent different parts of the state. Can you talk to me about what you're hearing from your constituents? A lot of times we get bogged down with what we see on CNN or MSNBC, or for those of us who might watch Fox News. But could you tell me what you're hearing from your constituents, what their voices are saying? And so I would like to start, if it's okay, with Councilwoman Diaz, and then I will go to Councilwoman Parker, and we will go, and I will make sure that I continue to hand it off.
Good evening, and thank you for the invitation, and hello to everyone. I really was completely shocked that this didn't pass. I was, you know, I work at the hospital. I know what the frontline workers make. I've run into situations where people cannot afford $1,000 a month just to get their medication. And we need to continue fighting, whether it's locally, statewide, or federally. We have to get out there and start rioting. I mean, not rioting, but protesting, because I believe that raising the minimum wage is going to help restore spending, the basics, and boost local economies. By lifting the federal minimum wage to 15, we can raise wages for 32 million workers. And not only that, my mother, she made it took her almost 27 years to make $17 an hour. She started at $3.35. And there are many women that are, they're single parents that need to pay their bills. In Lancaster, unfortunately, the cost of living is higher than in Philadelphia. And we just can't continue seeing people homeless. We have to stand up and say, look, enough is enough. Raising the minimum wage is how we can get a path to racial equality. And all across the United States, I mean, we have essential workers everywhere, whether it's in school, whether it's in hospitals. It's time for us to stand up. And in Lancaster, we have, especially in the city, we have many people working in nursing homes. Those are the frontline workers. And with COVID-19, so many people have lost their jobs, and they're not making enough to be able to sustain themselves. So I definitely will continue supporting the wages increase, and especially the schools now too, because there's a lot of workers that have gone back to school. And, not all of them have received their vaccines as well. And how long is it going to be? We don't know. So we have to, rest assured that working with the state and with the governor, we'll have to see a path that's going to increase the wages.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Diaz. Councilwoman Parker.
Okay. All right. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Hello. How are you, and how you doing, Ashley?
I'm doing well. I missed you.
Let me just start here. Jesse is speaking, and I'm elected to public office, but I'm a certified secondary English teacher by profession who just happens to be elected to city council. And Jesse, I'm listening to you, and while I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about civil rights activist and author James Baldwin, who said, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." So we are dealing with the global pandemic. We're in the midst of civil and social unrest across the globe as people gather to protest wealth inequity, police brutality. We begin to hear people across the globe saying, "Black Lives Matter. We're proud to be your allies. We believe in equity, diversity, and inclusion." All of these firms put these really snazzy, quotes and mission statements on their website, and they believe it until it's time to give me access to self-sufficiency. I wasn't surprised when I heard about the parliamentarians' decision. What I did think about, and I'll be quite frank, are all of the state senators who are on this call, all of the state reps who are on this call, who are working as hard as they possibly can to support our governor in his efforts to move Pennsylvania forward. And I thought about how difficult that job is as we are trying to do it state by state by state. And we have the ability to do it for our nation right now, and we've just missed an opportunity. But I was optimistic because I said, for those legislators who said that they wouldn't vote in support of ending the filibuster, for those legislators who said that they wanted to, see some common sense reforms associated with gun violence passed by the federal government, for those who are fighting for 15, guess what? No matter what your issue is, if you don't find a way to use the power that we have in the numbers that we have in the United States Congress now, we will get to a midterm election where we don't know what the outcome is going to be. So we've got to use that Vice President Kamala Harris, vote tying decision-making power that she has. And we've got to find a way to build a coalition that gets right to those people, those senators in particular, who are saying that They don't believe that we should be, making such a substantial change in a partisan manner to these very procedural roles. It's with that in mind that I say to people, don't tell me that you care about me, that you want to see homicides reduced in urban areas across this nation. Don't tell me that you care about working families when you won't give me access to the revenue to take care of myself. You want more parents engaged in schools, give them the ability to earn a living wage so that they're not trying to work 4 jobs, and maybe they can make it to the PTA meeting and get home in time to help a child with some homework, or prevent a child from going outside, getting engaged in some activity that will, strongly encourage them to get involved in something negative. So let me tell you what we've quickly done in Philadelphia. This is what local government has done. Mayor Kenny signed a bill into law that was introduced by my colleague, Mark Squilla. We increased the wage to $15 for all city contractors and workers. We did that. That's what we could do on the local level, right? So it's what did you do with the power when you had it? In addition to that, we put it on the ballot. It was a referendum. Philadelphians voted overwhelmingly. But the issue is not our delegation per se, particularly as it relates to the Senate. Well, we know we got one person, but what we really need to do is, and I don't know, it's been a long time since I've been in Harrisburg, Ashley, and I was only there for 10 years, and 10 years is only long enough to find your way to the bathroom as far as I'm concerned in Harrisburg, because it's so much work that you have to get done when I look at what my colleagues on here are doing. But I keep saying to myself, where is the urban-rural coalition? Where is that person with the credibility in white urban America to be able to go to folks there who are also not making a living wage because they are working in low wage jobs, to say people keep telling you are essential. They're putting up billboards. They're giving you certificates. They might even give you a damn watch, but they won't allow you to earn $15 an hour, give you some health care and retirement security so you can be self-sufficient. Coalitions, I will argue, that's what I thought about what we needed to do, and to continue working at all levels of government.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. I think next, again, want to talk about what you've been doing, what you've been hearing from constituents on the ground. If I could get Representative Mike Zabel to jump in and tell us what you're hearing on the ground, how you've been moving in your work in Harrisburg.
Thank you, Ashley. Well, I agree with Councilwoman Parker. I mean, what we've heard, or what I hear from constituents time and time again, is there are 2 groups: people who are doing really well and everybody else. And everybody is fighting to keep their head above water with their wages. And this is what people are trying to do. We have so many people in our area who are dependent in some form or another on the government for help based on the need, whether it's keeping their heat on or making sure they have benefits to feed their kids. If we raise these wages, if we elevated people's standard of living by saying we are committed to the idea that if you work for a living in Pennsylvania, you are going to be above the poverty line. Work has dignity and no work should exist in poverty. If we are willing to say that as a society, as people, as a country, then we wouldn't have as much need for programs and things like that. We want people want to work. They want to bring home food and money, and they want to feel like they have the ability to sustain themselves. And that is what about raising the wage to 15 is about. It's about dignity and self-sufficiency. And by the way, it makes sense. It makes sense for the economy. If we raise that wage, what happens? We've seen it. We've seen it where the minimum wage goes up. We've seen what happens. People spend more money. Consumer demand goes up. The economy grows. And wages go up, not just at the minimum wage level, but everywhere. And why does that matter? Well, right now, more than half of the people earning minimum wage are full-time workers. More than half. The average age of somebody making minimum wage is 35. This is not a teenager phenomenon. What's even more worrisome, I think it's either 54 or 55% of the entire female workforce makes less than $15 an hour. it's somewhere around 60% for a Latino population. And I'm drawing a blank on, it's somewhere around 50% of all African-American workers are making less than $15 an hour right now. And we all, or they all deserve that raise. We deserve to invest, and with a rising tide, lift everyone up. It's time to grow our economy, not the way that we've done it for time and time again, which is, you saw in the last Congress, they rushed. They were tripping all over themselves to give tax cuts to the corporations and the wealthiest 1%. And sure enough, when COVID hit, what happened? Guess who continued to make money? The rich got richer, corporations paid their stockholders, and the rest of us struggled. Well, it's time to reorganize our priorities. It's time for the people to invest in the people and raise that wage. Raising the minimum wage will impact certainly the people who are making minimum wage or $15 an hour, but it will lift everyone up. A rising tide will lift those boats. You will see the average wage increase across the board. How do we know? Because we've seen it happen in states that have already done it. So people here, people in my district, they worry that, particularly with the pandemic, they worry about, they live paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth in terms of how they live. And raising the minimum wage is about raising wages for everyone in Pennsylvania. So that's the sentiment I hear around here, Ashley.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I don't want to cut off anyone. We actually have gotten some really great questions on our Facebook Live and in the chat. And I want to make sure that we're asking. And Representative Zabel, when you were talking, one of the questions we got is really, and I'm going to pose this to Representatives Bullock and Sims, but we talk about the importance, but there's really a distinction between the difference of a minimum wage and a living wage. Years ago, we started having this conversation about $15, right? And so even in 2016, we were talking about $15, and we're now at 2021, and we're still having a conversation about $15 and a path to do so by 2025. But right now, the wage in Pennsylvania, as we mentioned, is $7.25 and has remained there for a decade. How does anyone even consider this? For those who have colleagues on the other side of that, how does anyone even consider this a living wage? Or why is this even a conversation in our state or in our nation? And so I want to turn this question over to Representatives Bullock and Sims, if that's okay.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. And you're right. Let me start with, what are the people in my district saying? One, they're saying, pay me my worth, pay me. You call me essential and all these things, but you don't pay me for that work. And then second, it's, why can't we get this done? And that leads to what you're asking there. Why can't we move the needle when it comes to increasing the minimum wage here in Pennsylvania? And at this point, $15 isn't enough. It's not, it may be minimum wage that we're working for, but it's surely not a livable wage. We know the cost of living from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, Erie, to Easton is extremely high and continues to grow here in Pennsylvania. Here's why. And we've heard all the numbers. We've heard that 60% plus of the minimum wage workers are women. Now, let me talk about those numbers, what they look like in the Capitol. Not 60% of our state legislators and senators are women, not at all. It's about 30-something%, right? And if the other percentage of workers, minimum wage workers, are people of color, are parents, or all these other demographics that we talked about, right? But there's a really big issue if you don't see yourself as a minimum wage worker, which is why it's important that we have women in our chambers. It's why important that we have people of color and women of color, particularly in our chambers, because if you can identify with that experience, if you have been a minimum wage worker, if you have people in your neighborhood, in your family that are minimum wage workers, then you understand that these aren't teenagers out here trying to earn some extra cash, that these aren't people out here, let me say this, aren't stay-at-home moms trying to earn a little bit of extra money on the side. No, this is not what a minimum wage worker is. And if you understand that, if you clearly understand that people are trying to raise their families on a minimum wage, then you will do what is necessary to pass that legislation. Councilwoman Parker, we will then find that coalition from urban and rural communities. But unfortunately, many of my colleagues don't see themselves as minimum wage workers, don't because they're not those 60% of those women. They're not the parents that are working to provide for their families, and all of these other concerns that we see. Now, we hear these numbers. Every state that touches our border, every single state that touches our border has an increased has a higher minimum wage than us, including West Virginia. Every single state. Maryland has it at $15 an hour. And every other state, 29 states have a higher minimum wage than Pennsylvania. There is work to be done. I also heard, I believe Florida increased the minimum wage during the pandemic. A Republican-held state during a pandemic increased their minimum wage. So the arguments I heard today, we had our Department of Labor and Industry come before the Appropriations Hearings Committee today, and we have heard them say, our colleagues, some of our colleagues who don't want to increase the minimum wage say, it's not the right time. It's not the right time. Guess what? They said that in 2016. They said in 2017, 18, and 19, when we had record low unemployment, that it wasn't the right time to do it. When we were doing better economically, still wasn't the right time to increase the minimum wage. So for them, it's never going to be the right time. So the right time for me is now. The right time was yesterday. The right time was 2016. I hope we have the willpower to get it done sooner than later. So we're not talking about this 4 years later, about when is the right time to increase the minimum wage. When is the right time to pay people their worth? When is the right time to make sure women can earn enough to provide for their families? All of these things that we need to do right now requires a little bit of willpower, requires folks to work across the aisle, requires folks to understand who minimum wage workers really are. And hopefully, I think also requires a little bit more diversity in our capital. So diversity as far as women, people of color, and people from diverse experiences that they bring to the Capitol so that people can have a better understanding of what we are voting for when we say increase the minimum wage.
Thank you so much, Representative Bullock. Turning it over to you, Representative Sims.
Thank you, Ashley. And Donna, thank you for laying that out so clearly for people. I think that there is oftentimes among those of us that are advocating to raise the minimum wage, there is a reluctance to talk about oftentimes the very obvious implications of those people that oppose the minimum wage. We could spend the rest of the evening talking about how the minimum wage as it is set right now impacts women, impacts people of color, impacts the LGBTQ plus communities across the Commonwealth. And I think there's this fear sometimes to point that out for fear of somehow enraging or infuriating the opposition. If their opposition is based in racism, if it's based in sexism, if it's based in ethnocentricity, if it's based in homophobia or transphobia, then it does need to be called out. And so I think that's a really critically important step that needs to be made. The average person who is opposing equality or opposing raising the minimum wage right now in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania looks like a lot of us that are on this call, and therefore deserves to hear from us about why the racial implications, the gender implications, the sexual orientation implications are so important. But maybe, Ashley, one of the important ways I can answer this is to try to talk to you about some of the things that I'm hearing, and I want to try to put $15 in perspective. Because as Representative Bullock just pointed out, $15 is not enough. And maybe if people really understand the perspective of it, they'll have an understanding of why it's so important that we begin at $15. The average rent here in Philadelphia is $1,650 a month. Now, when I was a kid, we often heard that your rent should be about 25% of your monthly income. Now, I did a little bit of checking, and of course, as rent has gone up, so has that number. And right now, what is sort of soundly suggested for people is that your rent make up about 30% of your monthly income. So right now, if rent in Philadelphia on average is $1,650 a month, and it's supposed to make up 30% of your income, that means that a person needs to be earning somewhere around the area of $5,750 a month in order for their rent to be just 1/3 of their income. That's roughly $69,000 a year, $69,000 and change. You break that down to a 40-hour work week, and people in my district and Donna's district here in Philadelphia should be earning a minimum wage of around $33 an hour if they're to thrive and survive in America the way that all of these people who talk about bootstraps and hard work suggest that they would thrive. And so, yes, $15 an hour is critically important. No, $12 an hour with 50-cent increments over the next 6 years isn't enough, and it's not fast enough. Because frankly, by the time we've caught up in 6 years, I think the average minimum wage in the United States, certainly here in Pennsylvania, should probably be closer to $40 an hour. Now that's not going to happen. And, we could talk for days about why that opposition is still so strong. But I think one of the critical things that's important to remember, as we've heard earlier on this call, that this is an issue that impacts every single Pennsylvanian in all four corners of the state, whether you proudly identify as urban, suburban, or rural. Whatever the work that you do in your area, you are impacted by a lack of a fair minimum wage, of a living wage, as Ashley pointed out earlier, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. These are the ties that bind. And when you look at the opposition and how they root their opposition in finance, or how they root their opposition in impact on business, well, that's where we can be the strongest. There is a case to be made that raising the minimum wage to $15 in Pennsylvania will bring $4 billion worth of economic impact to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Well, as somebody who is also sitting through some of these budget hearings, not as many as Donna is, I can tell you that $4 billion worth of economic impact on the Commonwealth is desperately needed and long overdue. No, I think it's really, really important to rob our opponents of the belief that what they are doing is somehow economically sound. It's not economically sound. And once again, we're passing off discrimination as economics. And I think it's really important that we call it out.
Thank you so much, Representative Sims. We got another question. And I want to send this one to, let's see, who will this question go to? Forgive me. I think we have not heard from State Representative Steve Malagari. We got a question about talking about, a number of your colleagues have already alluded to this, but why the minimum wage hasn't been raised in Pennsylvania, and why are we even having to rely on the federal government to get this done?
First off, Ashley, thanks for having me. Why are we not raising the wage in Pennsylvania? Well, I could probably speak to maybe 50% of that question. 50% of my district probably doesn't want to raise the minimum wage. 50% would like to keep it at the status quo. They feel that if we raise it, the small businesses will suffer. Well, quite frankly, I think the opposite is true. Our small businesses would thrive. More people would be able to spend money, go out, buy things, experience commerce, maybe get some reliable housing, potentially be home with their children a little bit more than they would. Quite frankly, the reason why is because our Republican legislature does not want to put it through. That is the simple reason why they don't want to raise the wage. That is it.
Absolutely. And I think, again, another question that was on our list, again, we hear critics who often talk about the wage being bad for business and the economy. And so certainly want to open it up to any other representative, senator, or council member who is on the phone who has a response to this. For those who are saying, look, raising the minimum wage will disproportionately be bad for our economy and will hurt particularly small business. What is the response to that? And I'll open it up to any one of our lovely legislators who have joined us on this evening. And I'm not sure, Representative Malagari, if you had anything else you wanted to add there.
I wanted to touch back briefly on what the conversation was before and put it into a little bit of perspective. So a month ago today, our policy chair put out an email to us, and they sent us policy points of the week or of the day. And it said, working at Pennsylvania's $7.25 minimum wage, you'd have to work 86 hours a week to afford the average one-bedroom rental home. 86 hours a week. I don't know how many of you have 86 hours in your week that you can stay awake for and function normally, but there are individuals that actually do work that hard. There are individuals that actually do that. And the other thing I wanted to mention was just a few weeks ago, Jeff Bezos became the world's richest person again, making Elon Musk go down one more. And we're not talking about a little bit amount of money. We're talking about a heck of a lot of money. And we're saying here that the net wealth of Jeff Bezos is now $191.2 billion, just 955 million more than Elon Musk. So I feel bad for Mr. Musk. I don't feel bad for Mr. Bezos. Quite frankly, they can share a little bit of what they have and help lift up everybody else in this country and make us be a little bit more prosperous, if they were to share a little bit of what they had. And I don't know what enough is for them, but in my own opinion, they have enough.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Representative Malgary. Certainly, again, if there are one or two of our distinguished electeds who are joining us this evening who want to speak specifically to those critics who talk about how this will be bad for the economy, particularly small businesses.
I'll jump
yes,
in if I
actually.
can.
Oh, go ahead.
Who was that? That's
That was me. Go ahead.
So we'll take
Janet.
Senator Kearney and Councilwoman Diaz on this question.
Janet, it's great to see you, by the way, on the call.
Nice seeing you too.
I just wanted to say that this is, just we're fighting against a long time's worth of propaganda that's been foisted upon the American people about, we have to protect the job makers as opposed to the job workers. And it's Brian Sims was talking about it earlier, and it's exactly correct. It's a narrative that we need to fight against, because the research is out there. It shows us what will happen if we raise the minimum wage. And, we can look at places like Seattle that have already raised, and it hasn't had the devastating effect that all the naysayers say it will have on it. So it's this whole idea that somehow you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get, you don't have to work through your 3 minimum wage jobs in order to make get your 85 hours in, as Steve just said. So it's a struggle for us, and we're fighting against, some very powerful, very smart people, and they're all about protecting kind of what they have, as opposed to literally trying to make our society a better society for everyone, not just for the people at the very top. With that, I'll hand it over to my friend Janet Diaz.
Thank you, Senator. Well, there are studies also that people don't realize. If you do have the right amount of money to survive, you would not have to rely on welfare. You would not have to rely on other services, which means that the taxes, everybody's taxes would actually go down. So you have to look at the broad perspective of everything that can happen. People will be able to stay at home with their children, which means that they would not have to get childcare services, which again would also alleviate some of those services that people actually go out and apply for because they can't afford to have child services. So these are things that they're not looking at. That's important to understand, that if we raise the minimum wage, we can reduce other workers and other people to paying less, which will bring more money to everyone's home, which obviously will be always have the opportunity to thrive, especially our essential workers. Like I said, my mother she was a frontline worker as well. She's still working part-time, and she takes care of a 98-year-old. She's only making $12 an hour. Now, obviously she's retired. She does it because she needs extra income. But the fact is, there are people that are not retired, and even if they would try to retire at 70 and 75, they can't, because they cannot afford it. They have to still work, and $12 an hour is not enough for them to pay for their their medication, because some of them have very expensive medication. I mean, let's take Plavix or Eliquis, things that are like $1,000 a month. And we hear it. I hear this every day because I work at a hospital, and these are our workers. It's not somebody that's not working or sitting at home and not being able to sustain themselves anyway. But giving them that increase is going to help us that are working already to reduce our taxes as well. And just like the senator said, or I think it was Representative Steve, he said it. It'll be more that we can go out there and purchase, whether it's anything that consumers can purchase to bring home. That's also beneficial to the small businesses. How many times you go to the mom and pop stores, you're actually helping that particular store that a lot of times is small businesses are owned by minorities, people of color, and we want to also help them in our community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both Senator Kearney and Councilwoman Diaz. I'm going to
Ashley,
put
could I
you
jump
on.
in real quick, just because to mention your
Absolutely,
question?
absolutely, absolutely.
Sure, because it comes up sometimes. This is the boogeyman that they use, this business, but the vast majority of the studies, and I'll quote here because I just called it up since you asked. This is a quote from an economics professor at MIT. And he's talking about minimum wage, raising minimum wage. He says, minimum wage raise earnings, they reduce individual and family poverty, and have no measurable negative effects on employment. It has been proven wrong time and time again. It doesn't hurt jobs, and it raises wages. Over and over. It's been the specter since FDR proposed a minimum wage decades ago. They always say it'll ruin it, and somehow it never does. In fact, what it does is it lifts the standard of lives of people up. And we've proposed in Harrisburg, by the way, okay, you don't want to raise the state minimum wage? Get rid of something called preemption, which means it would allow Philadelphia, would allow Councilwoman Parker to set a minimum wage for private employees in Philadelphia. Because we know what would happen. Philadelphia would raise its minimum wage, and Delaware County would, and Montgomery County would, and the neighboring counties would start to say, well, why aren't we having a raised minimum wage? Because it's a very popular idea. It's supported by the people. So let us have the chance. Let us have the chance. Do it federally. That solves the biggest problem. But then let communities set their wage. If they want, if Philadelphia wants to say, or Delaware County, my county says, we believe every worker should be paid at least $15 an hour. Let us do it. Let us experiment with our own economy. Experiment, because we know what'll happen. People will earn a better living. So anyway, just wanted to jump in with that. Thanks, Ed.
No. Thank you so much. Want to put just a forewarning out. We are going to wrap up soon. I have 2 additional questions, but want to give each of our electeds who joined us this evening an opportunity to give us any closing remarks. We ask that you would kindly keep them to about 30 seconds so that we can make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. But for our final questions, one of them I wanted to ask, and I think I am going to go to Senator Collette. Can we talk about, and some of your other colleagues have talked about this briefly, but can we talk about just the misconceptions that are out there about who will primarily benefit from a raise to the minimum wage? There are individuals who again think that the only folks who are making this $7.25 an hour are teenagers. But can you talk about, again, who about these misconceptions and who actually will benefit from, or who's helped or hurt from by raising the minimum wage?
Thank you, Ashley. Absolutely. You're right. This is part of the myth, right? This is that specter that we have been fighting against for so long when we talk about who's going to be benefiting from a minimum wage increase, or who are our minimum wage workers. And we've heard a lot on this call about who those people are. It is not the high school worker that is just earning a little bit of extra cash during the summer. It is not, as we've heard, the suburban mom who is just earning a little bit of extra pocket cash. That's not who our typical minimum wage worker is in the Commonwealth. I come from a nursing background, as I know that you know, Ashley, and I worked in nursing homes. And let me tell you something, that is hard work. It is hard work taking care of some of our most vulnerable family members and community members. Those are some of our minimum wage workers. The people that don't just work direct one-on-one care for our family members, but the people that work in our kitchens providing the food for the staff and residents alike in our nursing homes. It is, like we said, those home healthcare workers that work with our intellectual disability and autism populations, people that are really in need of that care. And I'll tell you something else too. It's people that really love the work that they do. I loved being a bedside caregiver. The people that I worked with in the nursing home love being bedside caregivers. And we don't need to be called heroes to know that we are, because we chose that line of work. It is a calling. We want to do it because we love to do that work. But what I can say is we're losing so many of those good, dedicated people because they're simply not earning a living doing that really difficult work, that they could be earning more money going to work at Costco, going to work at a convenience store, for example. And even that is not a living wage. Even that money, that's a couple more dollars an hour than the really difficult work of, being in a nursing home or being a home caregiver isn't the same as still isn't enough for somebody to earn a living wage by. So, I have to say that myth of the high school kid that's just earning a bit of extra cash for pocket cash is just that. It is the myth. We know that these workers, as Rep. Bullock said, are overwhelmingly women. We know that they are overwhelmingly our Black and Brown community members. We know that these are people that have often found themselves doing this really critical, important, hard work and not getting compensated for it. And just like Rep. Bullock made the point, the reason so many of our legislators in our state capital and in our nation's capital don't see this as a critical need because they aren't those workers. They don't resemble those workers. Their wives, their sisters, their aunts, their cousins, their daughters are not going to be or are not those workers. And so we've got to be really clear about who those people are, who they're providing that critical, important work for, and what it's going to take for us to push this across the finish line, to make sure that it is an issue that is germane to every single one of us that's elected. We owe it to the people in our communities to stand up for these things. We know that our budget is a moral document. We have always known it. Let's show where our morals are by standing up for the workers of Pennsylvania and making a $15 minimum wage part of our budget. Thank you, Ashley.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Final question before I do kind of a final remarks from each of you all. And this question, I think will go to Representative Bullock. Can you talk about how employers may actually benefit from raising the minimum wage?
Listen, it's almost like when you say happy wife, happy life, if your employees are happy, if your employees can provide for their families, if your employees can take care of their children, if they're not working 2-3 jobs, as Councilwoman Parker mentioned, then they become more productive, right? You're able to have employees that are going to, invest in the work that they do, commit their time and space to that work because they're not worrying about getting to another job or getting the sleep they need to get to the other job. They're not working all these exhausting hours that makes them honestly the least productive employee. So there are many benefits to that. And I think that if employers see that, if I heard stories about a restaurant in Philadelphia who understood by paying their employees a fair, livable wage, that their employees became more productive workers. It's that simple. And so, we need to do that work in educating our employers, educating them about the economic benefits of increasing the minimum wage here in the Commonwealth and across our nation, and giving them the support they need to get to that space so that they care about their own employees. Look, these are almost slave wages. I'm just going to be frankly with you. It's almost slave wages, particularly if you start looking at those who are working tip wages, which again are overwhelmingly women and really overwhelmingly women of color who are working in restaurant industry and hospitality industry. And then there are a whole nother host of issues of what it means to work for a tip wage, the history behind tip wages, which also comes from post-slavery era. And the abuse that happens when you are working for a tip, the things that you subject yourself to as a worker, to encourage or to solicit tips from your customers. It puts folks, particularly women, at risk. And those are not the way, that's not the way we should treat our employees, not the way we should treat our working families here in Pennsylvania. And so as we have this conversation about increasing the minimum wage, we have to also include the conversation about one fair wage, so that we are addressing the tip wage issues as well. And so, a lot of education is necessary for that to happen for both my colleagues here in the Assembly, the general public, and of course, the employers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Representative Bullock. So I said last question, but I got one more, and I'm going to turn this one over to Representative Sims, Councilwoman Parker. Just briefly, if you would tell me, what is your biggest concern if the minimum wage doesn't get raised? We'll start with Councilwoman Parker and end with Representative Sims. What's the biggest concern if this doesn't happen?
So for me, it is that all of our efforts to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots, the wealth disparities we see, the lack of home ownership, the lack of self-sufficiency and dignity that we would all like to see residents in our Commonwealth and in our cities, and quite frankly, in our nation achieve, that gap will get even further. I have to just quickly go back to Rep. Zabel and Rep. Bullock, and someone else mentioned this when they talked about the private sector. For those who don't get warm and fuzzy when we talk about $15 an hour with a built-in sort of COLA for inflation, it's got to make good economic sense to them. When they start talking about those people who have to depend on public assistance in order to live, they should know that they don't wake up that way. They don't wake up and want to be on public assistance. But the more people who have access to the opportunity to take care of themselves, there are, Rep. Zabel, less people dependent on government. The final thing I want to say relative to the private sector is this. We need you to speak. We need the chambers of commerces in each of our respective areas to let their voices be known on this. And, that means that they have to, I don't know if you all paid attention to what we witnessed with some of those legislators who, kept going along with the lie about this most recent election. And as soon as corporations said that they were going to take contributions off the table, did you notice how some people changed their minds? You see how quick just that process of getting business engaged in the process, it changed their mind. So I would hope that we would get our chambers involved to ultimately lobby the state chamber. I also hope we will remember Rep. Bullock. She mentioned the 29 states and Washington, D.C. that have minimum wages above the federal. I would ask you to remember the states who have not adopted a state minimum wage: Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee. So sometimes it's not just about like who has, right? When we talk about our region and what group we're in, it's also, right, who hasn't. And Pennsylvania, how long do we want to stay in that category? In addition to that, someone wrote in the chat, yes, we should, see this kind of movement take place in the city of Philadelphia. Remember what Rep. Zabel said: if we have the legislative preemption handcuffs removed off of local governments and municipalities across the Commonwealth, we would be able to do that. But because of that preemption, we are not. Thank you.
I'm Ashley, as you can imagine, not only do I agree wholeheartedly with Sherelle Parker, but I know better than to disagree with her. But I also, there's a reason that we call it political science and not political art. And it's because there are trends and numbers and data and math and politics that we can track. And you heard references to it earlier by Representative Zabel, by Representative Malagari, that the math here, the science, the economics behind raising the minimum wage is sound. And for far too long, we've allowed the opponents of raising the minimum wage to somehow couch their opposition in this unfounded economic belief that doing so is somehow bad for business and then small business, or somehow bad for the economy. The truth of the matter is none of those things are real. And so to your question is, what does it mean if we don't get this done? I explained earlier that there is just simply no way to not talk about this issue without recognizing the racial and the ethnic and the gender implications of a refusal to raise the minimum wage. But to what Councilwoman Parker just said earlier, if we don't do that, it is another indication that here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the gerrymander, the extreme gerrymander, perhaps the most extreme in the United States, has created an environment where we are willing to sacrifice, the sort of, we're willing to sacrifice families, we're willing to sacrifice people's time and energy for the lie that that somehow giving them a fair wage somehow is a reward, and that doing so takes from others. And that's not a lie that we can allow to perpetuate, not because of racism, not because of sexism, and not because of a misguided belief or another lie about the economy. And so it's incumbent upon all of us that can push back to push back, but we need to reclaim the high ground here. The high ground is that we are right morally, we are right ethically, and we are right economically, and we need to behave as such.
Thank you so much, Representative Sims. Again, we are going to allow each of our elected leaders who have joined us this evening 30 seconds to close us out. Before we do that, we would be remiss if we didn't take this opportunity with so many wonderful people on here. Again, I saw a comment by C. Clementine, who was in here, who talked about really just that. Again, these aren't people who are a figment of our imagination, but those, again, who we have had conversations with year in, year out, who shared in the chat box that, look, I'm tired of working 2 jobs. People who are not working 2 jobs simply to be able to take their families on vacation or to buy some fancy, expensive car, but are really just doing it to make ends meet and still can't make ends meet. And we have a responsibility to make sure that we're lifting our voices and that we're holding our elected leaders accountable. Certainly, we want to thank each of you all who have joined us this evening for being champions. We want to be supportive. And so again, I'm going to turn it over. I believe it's to Liliana from the FOF team, who has our call to action this evening. And again, we will come back and give closing remarks from each of our elected leaders. We will start with Representative Malagary to close us out, and then we will go down the line. Liliana.
Hi, everyone. I hope you all can hear me well. Yep, I see the nodding heads. Perfect. So like we just mentioned, the way that we can make things change is when we all stay together. We all come together as a collective group to see this change. And you know, we've spent the past hour talking about raising the minimum wage, and here are some things that you can do. So coming together to tell our elected officials that what we need to get done, whether one way or another. $15 minimum wage is the only acceptable, and it has to go up. So I'm going to be dropping, or some of our organizers are going to be dropping the links in the chat box now for a way for you to you know, make your voice heard to our elected officials. You can click the link, sign your name, and tell our leaders that what we need is the $15 minimum wage. I also do want to put on another ask for folks, and I've seen some comments in the chat box of how to get involved in this movement. So one way you can get involved is volunteering your time with us. You can help us on social media. You can help make calls to your neighbors, send some text messages, and just to make sure that your voice and your voices of your neighbors and every other Pennsylvanian is heard by our elected officials and our leaders. So those links are going to be in the chat box now. There we go. So we'll be, I'll be kicking it back to Ashley, and then we'll go from there.
So make sure that you click the link, that you are signing up to join us in lifting your voice. Again, we want to make sure that we are celebrating champions who have done the right thing, whether we're talking about in local government. Again, we were joined tonight by 2 of the finest city councilwomen across the Commonwealth. We are here with our state representatives, our state senators. They want to hear from us, but we also want to make sure that we are letting our congressional members know exactly what it is, the demand that is, and that we're not forgetting Senator Toomey. Oftentimes, you know, we talk about people being selective in who it is that they represent, reminding Pat Toomey that he represents the entire Commonwealth and that we are demanding an increase to the minimum wage. So without further ado, again, certainly want to say thank you. We are going to kick it off to Representative Malagary to just give us any final comments. If we could kind of limit those to about 30 seconds, we want to make sure that we hear from everyone. But again, thank you. Representative Malagary.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you everyone again for having me tonight, and thank you to all my colleagues for being on as well. We've heard for way too long about $15 needing to be the minimum wage. Right now it's a compromise because it's been so long. It absolutely has to happen. If we are to do this, we actually have to work really hard. Click on that link that she mentioned. Make sure you take your voices and bring them to us. That way we understand what is going on in our communities as well. We can only hear from so many people. So make sure you're active in that. In addition to that, to everybody on this call, I just want to say we have to fight for a higher minimum wage to get money back in the wallets of individuals so that way they can start being consumers again, and we can start giving back to our economy as well. It makes good financial sense. We heard all about it tonight. And I believe that we can actually do this if we work hard enough. I wanted to see it come out of Washington, but unfortunately, I don't know if it's going to happen now. So we have to put the pressure on Pennsylvania again. We have to put the pressure on our colleagues across the aisle and also within our own caucus to make this happen. So I hope that we will. I thank you for having me tonight, and I look forward to another roundtable in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Representative Malagary. Turning it over to Lancaster City Councilwoman Janet Diaz.
Yes, thank you, Ashley. And I really want to thank everybody on the Zoom and for the invitation. I will definitely continue advocating. I was always advocating for an increase. I know how hard it is. I know exactly how it feels to not be able to put food on the table. And I see all my constituents on a daily basis that have, basically told me, we need to do something. We need to fight back. I will definitely be a volunteer. I will also advocate as a volunteer as well and make those phone calls because that's what I like doing. But most importantly, we really need to continue working with Pennsylvania representatives and our senators to make sure Pennsylvania is on here. And also kudos to all those union people and all those frontline workers. I will always be an advocate for you. I was a union representative for 10 years, so I know exactly what it is to have wages that is able to put food on the table and a house over our heads and be able to sustain ourselves. So thank you again. And like I said, I will always be your advocate.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Diaz. Councilwoman Parker. We'll go to, I'm not sure if she's still on. I'm sorry. Yes. Yes.
One, Ashley, thank you guys so very much for having me. Just want to remind us all that we have 1.5 million people living in poverty in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's about 12% of our state population and 400,000 residents in the city of Philadelphia. My message tonight to every domestic worker like my grandmother was who raised me, every cashier, nursing assistant, home health aide, cook, retail salesperson, personal care aide, food prep workers, janitors, building cleaners, childcare workers, laborers, freight, stop, material movers, security guards. You deserve dignity. And at the local, state, and federal level, it's our job to use the leverage of our vote and our political advocacy to continue pushing for such. We will continue to do so. Don't take your eyes off the prize. You deserve dignity and self-sufficiency too, and 15 is just the start.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Parker. Representative Zabel.
Thank you, Ashley. So many great things said tonight. I'll close with something that we talked about, which is how to convince non-believers, people who aren't there yet. I think people have a tendency to remember the past the way they want them to be, not the way it was. And I think one of the key points in explaining to people why the minimum wage needs to be raised is it actually used to be a lot higher, adjusted for inflation, than it was. And there's a Republican senator currently right now in Congress in the Senate who said, he's opposed to raising the minimum wage to 15. And he said, well, he said, back when I was bussing tables and washing dishes, I only made $6 an hour. That was in 1979. Well, if you adjust that for inflation, he was making $24 an hour. 24. It used to be, it's not the way he remembers. Wages used to be higher. They used to, and we only want to go back to the minimum wage being a fair wage. And I think that's an important argument to point to people. When you adjust for inflation, the minimum, what we're asking for at 15 is, frankly, we could be asking for more. You heard that a bunch of times today. So thank you, Ashley. And thank you everybody who spoke today for your valuable insight.
Thank you so much, Representative Zabel. Representative Sims left a comment in the chat. Certainly, Representative Sims, you are welcome to give closing remarks. It is certainly up to you. If not, I will read.
Ashley, I'm just simply going to say thank you to everybody once again. This is very much something that is long overdue. It's going to happen with the help of this type of coalition. The leadership that you have brought together here, that SEIU is a part of, that the leadership of the elected officials that are participating in this call is somewhat unprecedented with respect to this fight in Pennsylvania. And so I'm very much lifted up by the leadership that we've seen here today, and I'm grateful for everyone's participation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Sims. Representative Bullock.
Thank you, Ashley. And again, thank you to the entire team that's on the call and all of my colleagues in both city and state government. You know, as chair of the Black Caucus, I'm going to make it plain here. Earlier, I said, you know, this is akin to slave wages. It's not to make a comparison, but to actually make the connection. You know, when our economy in this country historically was built on free labor. And if we look at the history here and where we are now, that what we are seeing is some big business still trying to take advantage of undervalued, underpaid labor to make a profit. Now, what is very clear to me, I think, is that we don't see the same response in small businesses. Some of the small businesses I spoke to are actually paying more than a minimum wage because they understand the value of those workers. It is big corporate America that continues to try to undervalue our workers and to take benefit of underpaying workers for their profit. And so that is something we need to really acknowledge in this country, acknowledge that history in our country, and that it continues in some form today. And hopefully we can advance the conversation moving forward. Thanks again to everybody else who's been on this call. I look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you so much, Representative Bullock. Turning it over to Senator Collette.
Thank you, Ashley. And I'm just, humbled and really honored to be here among all of you this evening and hear the great words from these great leaders. Thank you for Our Future and SEIU for putting this together. Thank you to every one of you who have shared your stories in the chat box. Thank you to every one of you who continue to share your stories as we continue this fight. I stand with you for this fight for 15. And as Councilwoman Parker said, that really is just the beginning, and we can make this happen. And every worker really does deserve the dignity that they're entitled to, every single one of us. So I stand with you. I'll continue to fight with you. And I can't wait until the day that we're all celebrating this and on to the next fight.
Thank you so much, Senator Collette. And finally, last but not least, to my co-moderator this evening, Senator Kearney.
Well, thank you, Ashley. This has been a wonderful event. We can't mince words on this. This is a moral question that we're really talking about in our society. I think we all understand that the system really is rigged, and it really is. We've heard people describe a kind of a war on poverty. We don't have a war on poverty. We have a war on the poor, and our society seems to be set up to keep people in poverty because people take advantage of that in different ways. So it's like many other ills that we have in our society. It's a dehumanizing effect where people don't think of these people. They can't empathize with them. They can't actually think of them as people moving forward. I'm going to end on the last note and say that this pandemic has basically shone a bright spotlight on the inequities that were built into our society and that have been happening for a very long time. And I'm heartened by the fact that some of our greatest societal advances occurred on the heels of events like this pandemic. Think about when we got Social Security. Think about when we got the minimum wage the first time. Think about when we got things like the GI Bill or things that helped people sort of raise up and create the great middle class that we used to have and we need to get back. So I'm hopeful that one of the great things that can come on the heels of this particular pandemic is a $15 minimum wage, which will finally give us moral authority and literally give us societal health. I mean, it'll literally make our society healthier. I'm sure everybody has experienced that drivers seem ruder and people seem they're shorter in terms of people. Obviously, we're seeing more violence that seems to be random that's occurring. And I really think that has to do with the fact that people are struggling to find their place in a society that's not making it any easier for them. And we need to change that. And we need to. I'm heartened that I have so many great colleagues here on this call who are with us in this fight. And we're going to. I love that Rick Blumenthal from the AFL-CIO was on before Bloomingdale. I think it's great, and I'm optimistic that we can actually make this happen with all our efforts. So thank you, Ashley. Thank you for a great evening.
Thank you so much, Senator Kearney. It's certainly, I guess I will just close with the famous words of Dr. Martin Luther King. The time is always right to do what is right. And so for those who say we can wait, we can't wait any longer. There's work for all of us to do. So certainly this evening, we want to say thank you to each of our elected leaders who have taken the time out of their evenings, times away from their family, to join this very important and necessary conversation. And to each of you all who have joined us, we have FOF volunteers, friends, and family from across the state, the SEIU, State Council, and healthcare family who has joined us this evening in co-sponsoring this event. We just want to say thank you. And we are committed to continuing to lift your voices and voices of Pennsylvanians across the Commonwealth. So again, we bid you a wonderful evening and good night.